talking about a firm's decision in the short run. The short run is a period of time when some of the firm's inputs are fixed and some are variable. We're imagining that we're in a television factory, a factory that turns out television sets by using labor and other inputs. And those other inputs include a factory, the size of the factory space, a conveyor belt, tools, anything else that they might use. But all of these other inputs are fixed in the short run. Now, if you want to calculate the cost of production, you have to not only consider the variable costs, which we've been studying, the cost of labor, but you also have to include the fixed costs. Now, the interesting thing about fixed costs is they're very easy to calculate because they don't vary with anything. That's the definition of fixed costs. Fixed costs are costs of fixed inputs. They are fixed. They do not change. No matter how many television sets you produce, no matter how many workers you hire, fixed costs are fixed. So you can look at a table like this one right here, and no matter how many television sets we produce, the fixed costs are going to be a constant $10,000. That's going to be our assumption. $10,000 is the cost of all of the inputs that we have to pay for that we cannot vary in the short run, including our tools, our conveyor belts, our factory space, etc. So whether we produce 2 television sets, 10, 30, 45, 48, 49, whatever, our fixed costs are all going to be $10,000. So fixed costs are constant. They are fixed. However, the more television sets we produce, the more we can spread our fixed costs out over the individual television sets. If you only make 2 television sets, then the fixed cost per television is going to be $500 or $5,000. 10,000 divided by 2 is $5,000. You can only spread your overhead, your fixed costs, over 2 sets, and that means $5,000 per set, and that's very expensive. But the more sets you produce, the more thinly you can spread your fixed costs out. If you produce 10,000 television sets, your fixed cost per set will go down to only $1. So the more you produce, the more your fixed cost per unit shrinks, shrinks, shrinks. This fixed cost per unit has a special name. Can you guess what it is? It's the average fixed cost, of course, the fixed cost per unit of output produced. In order to calculate the average fixed cost, what you want to do is take the fixed cost, divide by the number of television sets produced, and that gives you the average fixed cost. 10,000 divided by 40 televisions is $250 per television set. 10,000 divided by 49 television sets is $204 per television set. Notice that as long as you're producing more television sets, your average fixed cost is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If we ever went into an inefficient production where we added more workers and the number of television sets produced actually decreased, well, in that case, our average fixed cost would be rising again. But as long as you produce more sets, average fixed cost is shrinking. Let's draw a picture of average fixed cost, and I'll move all these numbers over there so that you can use them for reference. If you want to draw a picture of average fixed cost, what you'll find is that average fixed cost is what we call in geometry a rectangular hyperbola. Now, that's a mouthful, and it refers to a curve that approaches both axes asymptotically. If you're producing very, very few television sets, then your fixed cost per unit are going to be very high. But the more television sets you produce, the more the average fixed cost is going to get closer and closer to 0. So I can label this curve average fixed cost. It's very high when you're not producing many television sets. It then shrinks, and the more television sets you produce, the smaller it gets. This is spreading your overhead out over more and more television sets. Now, let's take this average fixed cost and let's put it together with another diagram, another graph that we're used to drawing, another curve, and that is the average variable cost curve. So let's draw the average variable cost curve in here. And remember, it looks like this, AVC. So now we've got two curves together. The average fixed cost, which is the cost of your tools and your other fixed inputs, and the average variable cost, which is the cost per unit of the labor that you need to hire. Well, together, your variable costs and your fixed costs make your total cost of production. So if you have average variable cost and you add it to your average fixed cost, you're going to get your average total cost. The total amount that you have to spend on labor and everything else per television that you produce. Now, how do you calculate this average total cost curve? Where do you get it? Well, you can get it a couple of different ways, but since we're in a graph, let me show you how it looks graphically. If you take the average fixed cost of producing a given number of television sets, right here, and you add it, the average variable cost of producing a given number of television sets, I've got to be careful here because I've got two curves, so I've got to make sure which one I'm looking at. And you add that to the average fixed cost. If you add these two together, then if I take this amount and put it on top of this and add them together, I get the average total cost. The average total cost is just average fixed cost added to average variable cost. And if I add the two together, then I'm going to get a curve. So by vertical addition, I'm going to get a curve that looks something like, let me find a couple of other points on it. Here's one, add those two together, and eventually I'm going to get a curve that looks like this. And there's my average total cost curve. The average total cost curve is the sum of the average variable cost and the average fixed cost. This is how much it costs our factory to produce television sets per unit, including the cost of labor and the cost of other inputs.